All right, just taking a quick look at the handout that I've posted on participles and infinitives. You're familiar, with course, with the three ways a participle can function: adjectively, and that's going to be attributive, or it can be substantive, and then verbal. Within verbal, though, you've got quite a lot going on here. Adverbial, um, sometimes sometimes called circumstantial. You've got more than just temporal. In elementary Greek, that's probably what you focused on, and that's where you have the participle, and you've got that finite verb, and so that you're thinking of it in temporal terms when the action happened in relation to the main verb, right? When this happened while he was speaking, that kind of thing. But you can keep in mind that it's a lot more than that. Temporal means manner, cause, condition, concession, purpose, result, and I can remember just memorizing those in my head, just having those kind of rote memorization. Temporal means manner, cause, condition, concession, purpose, result. But you don't want to just be able to memorize it, but to know what they are. I think the best way probably is just be familiar with this handout, review it consistently, and ultimately the best way to get these under your belt is just to read the Greek New Testament. And as you hit a participle, you're going to think about this. How is it functioning? Well, let's look at, you're familiar with temporal. So means is just giving the means that the action, the means of how the action happens. Look at Philippians here. But himself, ekenosen, he emptied himself, right? The form of a servant, labon, and so taking. So how did he take how did he empty himself? Well, by taking the form of a servant. Manner, similar to means, but it's more about kind of coloring. It gives you more of a color of the action. She came trembling. So she came. Here's a verb. And here's our participle, tremusa. How did she come? Not so much instrumentally, but just kind of giving more of a colorful picture of how she came. Of course, causal. Jesus, because he was weary, he sat. Conditional just implies a condition. So Jesus says, whatever you ask in prayer, pistuontes, believing you will receive. And so it's certainly not while believing. And so you think about it, and this actually has a conditional sense to it. If you believe, you will receive. Concessive here, the state or the action of the main verb is true in spite of the action of the participle. So the key word here is although. So here this example is philemus, eyes, having eye. This is our participle here. I could use my pen here, I reckon. Kuntes, let's see here. Get that working. I must have something going on here. Boom, there we go. So, akantes, and so there's our participle. So, although having eyes, right, do not see, and purpose and result, of course, are just going to reflect the purpose of the action and the result of the action. Here's an example here for result. He was calling God his own Father, right? With the result of, there's our key phrase, making himself equal to God. And then God equal himself, poion, there's our participle. So it's not while making himself equal to God, but with the result that, right, he made himself equal with God. So with these, you just think about the key phrases that are associated with each. I think it's good to have an example of each one, so I hope that helps you. Let's take a quick look at these others. Attendant circumstance. I do want to focus on this quickly. Attendant circumstance is fairly common. You have a participle, usually in the aorist, and it's usually in narrative, like a gospel or Acts. Not always, but that's very often. And it usually comes before the finite verb. The key is that it's not giving a description about the action, but it's actually, as the name implies, it's attending that circumstance. It's a circumstance that attends this circumstance. So they really happen at the same time. And so we translate it just like a finite verb. Now this is from aphiemi, it means to leave. But we wouldn't say while leaving all things they followed him, aklutheo, but leaving all things, right, they followed him. Or we could even typically do it more as a finite verb. They left all things and they followed him. Do you see what's happening there? So attendant circumstances, rather than this happened and then this happened, it's more like that, right? It's really one action, or one, they're happening at the same time. They left all things and they followed. Does that make sense? Attendant circumstance. And again, this is fairly common, so you want to be on the lookout for that type of participle use. And you're familiar with indirect discourse. I'll let you read through that. The complementary participle just unpacks that verb. Jesus finished, and so he finished, and then you have this participle unpacking that verb. Teleo, Jesus finished. Diatason, teaching, right? So it just kind of tells you more information. He finished what? Well, he finished teaching, complementary. And yeah, of course, participle absolute would include this genitive absolute structure. You're familiar with that from elementary Greek, but it's going to be in the genitive. You have a genitive noun or pronoun and a genitive participle. And just take your pronoun or noun and just translate that like the subject, and take the participle, make it a finite verb. So it's like while he was saying these things. And it just gives you some background information on the rest of the sentence. Infinitives. Now the infinitive is a bit odd because it can be very idiomatic. And by that I mean the structures, the grammar, it just looks odd to us. And so we have to appreciate that. In various ways we can say purpose. And just think about these categories as well. When you think about an infinitive, it can reflect purpose. It could be just the infinitive by itself. It could have the article. It could have the preposition plus the article. Esta, prosta, can reflect result. These are the different ways that can be reflected. Most often you'll see hoste, and when it's going to be result. Hoste plus infinitive, very common. And then we've got time. Just briefly want to mention this. Infinitive of time. It can reflect, obviously, the antecedent action, contemporaneous, or subsequent. Key word here is after. After. And we'll see metata plus infinitive. And metata, of course, de, just and. Meta, ta, there we got that. And then we've got our infinitive, thenai. After I am raised, right? And the accusative is functioning like the subject. You get that with the infinitive. And then ento plus infinitive, when or while. Ento, sperein, there's my infinitive, autan, that's going to be my subject. And while he was sowing. And then subsequent, keywords before. Could be pratu, pren, or pren, a, and then you'll have an infinitive on all those. But example here, katabethi, come down, and they have pren apathanein tapadian mu, before my child dies. Okay, so you're looking for these indicators like metata, ento, pratu, and these will be indicators of the infinitive of time. Causal, dieta is very common, plus infinitive. And we've seen the complementary quite a bit as well. A lot of words used that are very common. Archomai, I began, or I began. Bulomai, I wish. Dunamai, I am able. And you can sense how that just, when you see that, I am able, dunamai, you just are looking for an infinitive there, because you really need something to complete that. I am able to something, right? And that's going to be a complementary infinitive there. Now these are also, you want to keep in mind just the substantive uses, and I'm just going to briefly note this, but infinitive can function like the subject of a sentence, direct object, indirect object, and also sometimes you'll see this epexegetical category, and it's pronounced epexegetical. And something you'll come across fairly often. You'll see it in commentaries. But this is explaining the noun or adjective. So I have food to eat. Ego brosen. I have food. And then we have, let's see here. I see we got a pronoun here. I had to look closely. So I, food, echo, have, right? So it says emphatic pronoun, food, and then the verb here. I have food. We could just leave it at that, but this is an epexegetical infinitive, just telling us more about that food. Does that make sense? I have food. What kind of food? Food to eat. And we would just say epexegetical infinitive. I know we went through that kind of quickly, but again, review these well, just because these categories are going to serve you well going forward.